in. Welcome. I don't know what is here the tradition, the custom. Am I introducing myself? Is it being done differently? I do it just myself. So my name is Stephan Schmitt-Degenhardt. Don't bother to try to write it down. It's not easy. And I'm the private sector advisor, or private sector development advisor at the Bratislava Regional Center. And I would like to talk to you today about private sector and human development, the aspect of choice. I mean, we can imagine there are numerous connections between private sector and human development, and particularly when we look at the current situation, then we realize that there are numerous influences in both directions between private sector and human development. So what I was trying to emphasize is here just one aspect of all this one. So please forgive me, that's the first time that I am trying to do a presentation based on Prezi, and Elena brought me to Prezi. She recommended Prezi, and I'm really happy that I got this kind of tool because I think it is very, very useful. So if I get sometimes stumbling, then you forgive me. How relevant is the private sector at all? Maybe one more thing, if anything is unclear, interrupt me immediately, and other things we discuss then as it comes mostly afterwards. First of all, the question is how relevant is the private sector? Oops, wrong, you see, there. When we look, how many businesses are there in the world? And how many households have a direct connection to a business? Because we always like to say there's the private sector, there's the government, there's civil society, and they are somehow opposing each other. I think that is Dutch. First of all, everybody after 5 p.m. or after 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., if there is overtime calculated, is against civil society. So be it government, be it private sector, it doesn't matter. You are after latest 7 p.m. civil society. Number two, for every household, it takes at best 6 contacts to a formal entrepreneur. I mean, 6 direct contacts. You will see here, oops, it doesn't look very good. There is this dark triangle, and that's the household where there is an enterprise, which has an enterprise, and 6 are rounded. So every 7th person in average, 6.7th person worldwide has, a household, sorry, has an enterprise. That shows you simply how important the private sector is. It is not that the private sector is out there, something else. And when you then still think of informal enterprises, we all know that most people work in the world work in informal enterprises. In the CIS countries, that is the illegal side. In other countries of the world, you have a ministry for informal enterprises. So in other words, they don't bother about this thing to say, come on, everything needs to be formalized and properly. They simply acknowledge the fact that most people are informal entrepreneurs and they try to support them. So when you take them in addition, then it's even every 3rd household who has a connection to who has an enterprise, a business. That shows simply how important it is. But entrepreneurship is determined by cultural preferences. Cultural preferences for certain activities. You will realize it, that in many countries, the type of activity what the people want to pursue is quite limited. Go to the airport and tell them we want to support blue-collar jobs. They will look at you and see that is nothing for them, because blue-collar jobs just is a no-go. This one would be a no-go there. I remember working once in United Arab Emirates, trying to get them to blue-collar jobs for consulting only. It's close to impossible. close to impossible. So, in other words, while, for example, in Germany, I'm a German, that would be a normal thing. Society would look up to those people who are simply mechanics. Why not? And culture is a matter of choice, in a certain way. We are born into a culture, but we form the culture as well. You have a status of the activity. You can be the entrepreneur. I like that picture. It's really cute. You can be an entrepreneur. That's a choice. Usually we would assume. We come later to that one a little bit more in detail. It's a matter of choice to become an entrepreneur, who then, of course, creates employment usually, or to become employee. Now, trying to find a picture of a young kid, which is an employee, is a little bit difficult, but definitely somebody who's just reading books with smart glasses. Could be rather a government official or so, I don't know. But this person doesn't look as if he would become, it's a he, it looks like, a real entrepreneur, not a really active part behind it. So you have to look at that one. Entrepreneur or employee. Again, we come to that later. It's a kind of choice. And as we said before, when every 7th household is an entrepreneur, the rest are somehow employees. Now, let's look at the quality of employment. I like this praising. Somehow it looks good. Good. Now, what are these famous business indicators doing with quality of employment? And I think that is a very crucial question. I'm myself not very fond of the doing business indicator for various reasons. Doing business indicator is measured in the capitals of the cities and of the countries and not in the provinces. The doing business indicator is mostly measured by asking accountants and by asking lawyers, and usually the small enterprises don't have accountants and lawyers. And although it looks also at perceptions and at actual points, it has is a lot based on interpretation or on the existence of laws, and we all know that there's a big difference between the law and its implementation. So when we look at quality of the doing business indicator, that's how it's being made up. Employing workers, rules on hiring, work schedules and redundancy. And you will realize directly a conflict on human development terms also of interest here. So you're doing business indicator for them, everything is better, the less rigid the hours are in the index, of course the difficulty of hiring index, I find it interesting, I find it clear, but the less difficult it is to throw somebody out, and the less difficult it is the lower the redundancy costs are. There's of course a very clear opposing views in what is good supposedly for the entrepreneur and what is good for the employees. Thinking of it again, every 7th household is an entrepreneur, 6 households are employees. Roughly. Government employees are there, of course, included in the 6 households. So, it's a big question. Redundancy cost, difficulty of redundancy index. The faster we get rid of somebody, sorry, by tomorrow you're out, the better it is. I'm not sure if we can determine the optimum. So, I realize you cannot read it easily. You will read it in the internet. That is too small. That's the beamers there. Okay. These things are for that size a little bit too small. But anyway, when you look at that one, where is the cost of redundancy highest? You will realize Eastern Europe is very low. Other countries are much higher. Just always to put it into perspective, when we speak about cost of redundancy, when we speak about the labor laws in the CIS countries, and I try to focus as much as possible on the CIS countries, where do we stand? Not very rigidly. And why? Interestingly, there is quite a competition in a number of the CIS countries on climbing up the ranks in the Doing Business Index. The easiest to do that, interestingly, is mostly in the labor index. How to throw out people, that's fast. So in other parts, they keep it more difficult. The Global Competitiveness Index is hiring and firing practices. I prefer the Global Competitiveness Index, despite it has also its shortcomings, of course. So when you look at the question, how would you characterize the hiring and firing of workers in your country, then you realize again that they see it, the easier it is to get rid of somebody, the better it is. The easier it is to hire somebody, it's clear that it is better. But now, of course, when you're an entrepreneur, the question is, when you hire somebody very easily, but it's afterwards very difficult to get rid of the person, then you don't hire in the first place. So the two need to be a balance somehow, because people are not that dumb that they cannot predict it. So you realize in both of the schemes, Global Competitiveness Index as well as the Doing Business Index, the major point, looking at the quality of employment, is for them, the easier hire and fire, the cheaper to fire, the better it is. Nobody would dare to say what is an optimum. Is there really an optimum? That's an open discussion which we can have afterwards. So, now, question is, we always make fun of the capitalists. Now, everybody who has a job, you can say, is a job capitalist. Because they have something. Huh? So, what are the people who are unemployed? For the ones who are employed, the trade unions are working beautifully. Those who are unemployed, who protects them? In the OECD countries, there are at least unemployment protection schemes. But in the other countries, particularly when you go here to South Asia, etc., they don't have anything. Eastern Europe and Central Asia has at least something. You see, it's at least quite okay there, that they are caring for those who don't have a job. So, who represents the interest of the unemployed and gives them a voice? These questions in red, I placed them out simply because I think that are major points which we can discuss afterwards. I don't have an answer to these ones, but it's simply a very interesting discussion, and maybe that we don't forget them. I don't want to write it down myself. Who volunteers to write the right questions here down? Somebody volunteers, or do I have to determine? From there, count number 20. Oh, what? You want? Good. She moved. That was a mistake. Among public officials, you're never allowed to move. Those who move are drawing attention, and then so they get the work. Sorry. So just in catchwords, interest of the unemployed represents interest of. They're coming more, so leave a little bit space. There are 5 or 6 of these questions. So just that we keep them in mind. Good. I nevertheless continue. Because she has directly a second one. And who protects the interest of the informal working class? When you look at this one, I quote what is written here. The global informal working class is almost 1 billion strong. It's the fastest growing and most unprecedented social class on earth. According to the UN study of urbanization, informal workers are now about 40% of the economically active population of the developing world. So we have informal entrepreneurs and informal workers. And in all cases, one is discriminating against them. We are all speaking of the formal enterprises, and me too. I'm in favor of formalizing enterprises, of course. That gives an easier, and the informal working class represents the interest of informal working class. Thank you. So when we look at that 1 billion people are informal workers, at least. That's a lot. When we then look at the informal entrepreneurs in addition, then we realize all our beautiful laws and rules and regulations and so on leave out the majority of the people. And simply by making stricter rules and regulations, we can say, yes, we are now beautiful, we satisfied the demands of the World Bank or the IMF or whoever is coming to the United Nations. But that puts many more people into underground, and we can use that not only for informal working class, is usually not really considered. And the effects of this one, because they really don't have anybody who can protect them. In no way. They are, well, according to the GCI and according to the Doing Business Index, beautiful. Because ease of hiring, extremely easy to hire an informal worker. Ease of hiring, you're out. Blank. Redundancy costs 0. So if the whole world would be informal, or with their status, they would all be in the Doing Business Index and the Global Competitiveness Index. They would all be top-notch, these economies. Unfortunately, they are not counted, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. So, we go back. Remember the point between choice of entrepreneur or employee. This is a cultural choice. You will realize, and as said, we will come. You can sit down. Thank you. No, yeah. The next one comes. Don't worry. That's not fair if you're sitting all the whole time there. There are not so many. Don't worry. So, remember, it's to a large degree also a cultural choice. We'll rather prefer to become an employer or an employee. It's not just a point of economics. So, but this is something very important. Maybe one can quarrel about the dimensions, the sizes of the different boxes here in that pyramid. But when you look at it from the human development perspective, the worst outcome is, of course, to have no income. The worst outcome is, of course, to have no income. But when you have no income, and the only choice to make somehow a living is to become an entrepreneur because there are no jobs available, then you call it a necessity entrepreneurship. That's entrepreneurship out of no choice, not out of choice. And we are speaking here about choices. That is something extremely important when you look at the necessity entrepreneurship. It's an entrepreneurship out of no choice. And I will show you there something. If I manage to get, it works. So, I hope that I manage to come back then again. This is from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitoring Report. Report which I would recommend all of you to read. It's being launched every year, Global Entrepreneurship Monitoring Report. Highly interesting topics, and I think one of the best of all. And when you look here, necessity-driven entrepreneurial activity, you will find that it is unfortunately only 55 countries and not many CIS countries. But you will find, for example, Norway here, very low. And the CIS countries, here you will find Russia, somewhere here I think, or here. The CIS countries are rather on the higher side with necessity entrepreneurship. Look at that one, that are percentages. 30% roughly of the entrepreneurs in CIS countries are necessity-driven entrepreneurs. What does that say about human development? Yes, better than no income at all. But is that entrepreneurship out of choice? Do I go, or do I go back? Is it now that is, sorry, because I have to go here now up. So, now we look at opportunity entrepreneurship. I have to go through the whole thing once more. Which obviously reflects the opposite picture. Opportunity entrepreneurs are those who who identify an opportunity in the market and say, that's what I want to do. That's entrepreneurship out of choice. That is from the perspective of human development, of choice, the best outcome, of course. And you will realize again where we in most of the CIS countries, here you have the Baltics and Czech Republic. Yes, that are the outliers. But you realize out of choice, there are not so many entrepreneurs in these countries. Okay. No, can't be. I don't want to go always back here. Sorry. I told you or asked you for your forgiveness from the very first moment that I will have potentially some. No, wait a minute. So, there I am. Okay. Good. I hope that I'm back again. So far to the topics of necessity. Oops. No. I want still to, sorry, I have to go. There's still more. I have to go through it. I have a problem with that. It's a good repetition.
Yes.
Yes.
So, it serves a purpose. One just has to know how to sell it. Okay, so in other words, one can safely assume that in the CIS countries, 30% or more of the entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs out of no choice. That's what I spoke about. And that leads us to the question, what is an entrepreneur? You can get there, and that is now the very important part. Thank you. That is now the very important part when you look at entrepreneurship, not only from the viewpoint of necessity entrepreneurship. What is an entrepreneur? No, that's already, I'm already in the next slide. What is an entrepreneur? You can not only look at it from opportunity and necessity entrepreneurship. That's one point. Is a necessity entrepreneur really an entrepreneur? When we are speaking about the innovative forces of entrepreneurs, necessity entrepreneurs? Oh, yes. necessity entrepreneur is happy when he or she gets out of the job again and finds finally a formal employment. So, Schumpeter would say the entrepreneur is only, in that sense, the opportunity entrepreneur who gets going. Now, there is something which is important to know. This creative, thank you. This creative destruction of the opportunity entrepreneur is, well, it's also a little bit limited when we know that, first of all, even among the opportunity entrepreneurs, most are what you call lifestyle entrepreneurs, lifestyle companies. They want to create a company to secure a certain income. It's a carpenter who likes to work with wood, and they don't want to grow. Or a locally arrested firm, as you call it, which are companies like a bakery, who just serve or a small pub, who just serve a very small local market. These people are not interested in growing. It's only 3% of the micro enterprises, about 3%, who are really growing. And worldwide, when you speak about this Schumpeter type of entrepreneur, you can roughly say that are no proofs for that, but I heard it a number of times and we based a number of points on that. You can say 3 to 5% of the humans are really entrepreneurial. That's 3 to 5%. The rest, lifestyle entrepreneurs or employees. You can have the socio-economical view. Those with a low or no achievement motivation, the necessity entrepreneurs, they don't have an achievement motivation. Why? They want to get out of it. They want to get an employment. Or a low achievement motivation for lifestyle firms. They say, why should I? I get my sufficient income, I have a nice time, I have a nice life. Why should I do more? That's the socio-economical view. And the last one, something very important and coming up more and more and more, the entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial employees. That are people employed who have entrepreneurial characteristics, where big companies are doing that more and more and more, when they realize that their employees are really entrepreneurs, they don't want to lose them. They say, you get your salary, go. Get your innovation, but within our company. You have the security. That are the entrepreneurs. A very, very important group. Who is from Ukraine? Two. I love the scheme, which is, among others, in Ukraine being done, where you have these individual entrepreneurs, which are after a group for tax avoidance reasons, for complete wrong reasons, of course, in holdings, where one bigger company, from the outside it looks like a big company, I was told those examples, I don't remember anymore what it was precisely, but from the outside you have a big company, but inside the company has maybe 10 employees, although there are 500 people working. Because everybody, the one brings his table, the other one brings her computer, and everybody works under one big roof as individual entrepreneurs. They do it there for tax avoidance reasons. I know in other CIS countries they do it as well. You can almost call that almost entrepreneurship. It's not being counted. Of course, it is absolutely illegal. But I tell you one thing. My belief is that the system from the two of you is a system with, once it is done for the right purposes, is a system which has future. That's a system where everybody is an individual entrepreneur grouped in big holdings. I believe that has chances. That could be the future. So, what is an entrepreneur? Where are we looking at when we think of entrepreneurship? It's a question which we should try to answer. We will not be able to find one answer for it. To this entrepreneurship. In Russia, entrepreneurship, surprise, surprise, is one of the lowest worldwide. It's even less than 20% of the average of efficiency-driven economies, and even below most factor-driven economies. You know the distinction between factor-driven, efficiency-driven, and innovation-driven economies, which I find better than the least, and low and middle developing countries, etc. I find that a much better distinction. So when you look at that one, in Russia, among the efficiency-driven percentage economies, less than 20% of the average. No entrepreneurship in Russia. And I would say by implication in many other CIS countries. So, again, is that a choice between self-employment and employment always a matter of choice? And if so, what do the people prefer? Now something which I did myself. I had myself some surveys when I worked in the respective countries. And in El Salvador, for example, we tried to find out there the differences between the preferences for formal employment versus self-employment. Ceteris paribus, that means under all equal circumstances, same monthly income, working hours, blah, blah, blah. And it was highly interesting, roughly 80% of the people preferred in El Salvador fixed employment. In Aceh, in Indonesia, it's the same. 80% preferred self-employment. Now, Aceh has, of course, a certain history that was short after they finished the 29.5-year civil war with Indonesia. And that they were very independently minded is understandable. But it shows you, very simple, when you go to a country, you cannot simply assume, from a human development perspective, everybody wants to become an entrepreneur. All these programs of saying we have to create micro-enterprises are fine if the alternative is no employment and no income at all. But in many cases, you should ask yourself, is it better to promote a larger or medium-sized company to create formal employment? And I think it is in many cases, simply because they create formal employment, and that's what the people prefer in many cases. In Aceh, you would go differently. Something which is very important to memorize when you look at any kind of development programs or government programs, for that sake. Now, look at the percentage of self-employed in the population. Worldwide average, about 13%. CIS countries, the half. Okay, 4 countries only I have there, but good, sorry, I don't have more data there. Percentage of female self-employed in the population. Same again, same relation. But now comes the interesting thing. Gender gap between male and female employment. In the world, it's 16.4. Much more men are employed than women. The gender gap in the CIS countries is the half. There, although the women are much less self-employed, the gap to the men in relation to employment is much lower. Another point which I didn't put therein is the issue of necessity entrepreneurship. And you will find, and that is something which is constantly overlooked, even by all the colleagues from the gender department, necessity entrepreneurship is usually twice as high and even higher among women than among men. Because the usual distribution is that the men take up the risky jobs and the women care for the base point. Therefore they are saying, I get the thing, I get an income. Looking at these three together, low percentage of self-employed, high percentage of necessity entrepreneurs, low percentage of intrapreneurs, comes to the crucial point: exclusion. Now, if I told anybody of you before all this information that you could see the entrepreneur, the species entrepreneur, in the CIS countries, or in many CIS countries at least, as an excluded animal, you would probably have shown me you're nuts. Very likely. But when you look at that one, yeah, I'm not speaking of the oligarchs. I'm speaking of the individual, of the small and medium enterprises, which are by naturally always the majority of the enterprises. You have in a certain way really in these countries the entrepreneurs as excluded. The human development perspective of that one is obvious to all of you. Remember that picture of the world? Then you see the business density rate. That business density rate says how many businesses per thousand population. It is naturally a little bit tricky because many it's taken from statistics, and most of the times the statistics are lying. Don't trust any statistics which you didn't fortify yourself. So, not that the statistical office are intentionally, I don't say that necessarily, intentionally tricking the figures, but simply a lot of businesses are still registered which are inactive. But when you look at it, it's a worldwide phenomenon, assuming that the bias is always the same. The business density rate, world average is 30. CIS country plus Georgia, 16, half. The household size, at a given household size of 5 in the world and 3.9 in the CIS countries, means in the world, every 7th household has an enterprise. That means that people are somehow exposed to entrepreneurship. Everybody knows somebody who's an entrepreneur who can influence the way of thinking. In the CIS countries, as I'm speaking about, it's the excluded population. Every 16th person household is an entrepreneur. Not so many. When you think of it, that you have, it may be just that you might be able to know one entrepreneur, maybe. Just digest that one. So when we look at this long-term entrepreneur, that influences, of course, competition. Competition. What does it mean? For a sufficient level of competition, you need, after all, a sufficient number of businesses. You need people to compete with each other. Otherwise, if you have 2 or 3, okay, when you look at economic theory, a good oligopoly of 2 or 3 companies which are fighting with each other is usually better for the consumers in a certain way because they really fight and they try to innovate than sleepy polypoly of many, many companies. But having said that, to put it a little bit more into an actual context, now probably all of you have heard about the current, just recent, current ongoing tricking of the LIBOR. Barclays, you have heard about it? No? A few of you? So the LIBOR is an interbank rate. At what rate do banks offer each other credit, money? And it's being determined among banks, in a certain way, an oligopoly of banks. I don't go there into details, it's tradition, since long, it was still at the time designed when there were things like a gentleman agreement. At that time there were only gentlemen who had used that. Who stick to their word and who are honest. What I'm not so sure what happens nowadays. Now, this LIBOR rate influences all the money transfer. How, in what money, at what percentage, at what interest rates, money is being credited, and money loans can be taken out. Everything. And numerous banks tricked it. That is a collusion of interests. Cartel, the European Union sees it as a cartel. Now, in how far really the central banks might have given approving nod to that one, yes or no, is another story. But it shows you that competition in that moment when it leads to collusion, if there are two less players, it's very easy that it leads to a collusion of interest, to a cartel, can influence the whole world financial flows. They tricked it. And in Canada, in the United States, in the European Union, Switzerland, everywhere they are currently running investigations. Very good, very well adding to the trust of the people into the banking sector. Now, ownership and competition. In the CIS countries, you would say, or in many companies, or there's a rise in state-owned enterprises. And the CIS countries, there were in former times in the Soviet Union, everything was state-owned. So the question is, in how far does the ownership of a company matter for competition? My point would be it should be definitely a sufficiently large number of private run companies. But the question is, how big is that private part? So, is competition, which we need, primarily a matter of business identity, how many businesses exist, ownership, of cultural values? Some people might say, we enjoy, we have a business, and we enjoy not being competitive, we just adjust. Then you can have thousands of businesses, and you don't have competition. In other cases, in other cultures, where people are highly competitive by nature, it might be that just a few are sufficient. Looking at CSR, corporate social responsibility, one says with more intense competition, firms with CSR can gain edge. Usually, big companies engage in CSR to get a competitive edge. But what is the optimal degree of competition? I write it down. What's the optimal degree of competition? That's a big, big question. I'm coming to the end now. There may be another point which is quite important at the moment. It's just something for digestion. I just mentioned a few figures. Read in The Economist, so it should be true. The roughly 20 largest wealth management and asset management funds and banks manage assets equivalent to the whole debt of the Eurozone. Imagine this. 20 funds manage the same amount of money as the whole debt of the Eurozone. And the debt is roughly equivalent to the GDP of the Eurozone. So when you think of it, that these 20 funds have constantly to reinvest their money, as the Eurozone countries have constantly to refinance their debts, then you might derive from there a certain, influence of 20 funds over the fate of the Eurozone. And when you then think about former events, look at the point when 1% just brought down the British pound through speculation. Look at the Asia crisis of '97. Up to you to make your conclusions. Competition depends as well on consumer preferences. Choice, high quality, and discounter mentality. Some consumers prefer choice. Some prefer only the quality and discounter mentality. And that depends on the product. Go to Germany, where you have an extreme discounter mentality in relation to food, because we apparently don't care so much for food. Look at Aldi and Lidl and all those discounters which originated in Germany. But on the other hand, we want to have very high quality in other products. Now, when you look for argue from Porter, diversification-based competition increases choice. You can have competition as a company, you can go into different directions. Quality-based competition increases the standard of living. You get better products. And price-based competition reduces costs and thus increases affordability. Now, again, it's a matter of choice of the consumers as much as they influence the companies. In which direction the economy is going. Now, of course, you have also economies, and going sometimes in some shops in these countries, in the CIS countries, I have the impression as if it's still a very supply-side driven part. Take it or leave it, where the company, the shop assistant tells you, I don't care if you buy the product or not. So as long as that mentality is there, of course, then it's a supply-side driven choice between these points. So when you look at the lonesome entrepreneur, you can fortunately still nevertheless make one conclusion that a low preference for self-employment does not necessarily translate into lower economic dynamic or innovation. Take Japan. Japan has an extremely low preference for self-employment, extremely risk-averse culture. Now, forget about the last 15 years in Japan, or 20 years, when they are basically flat. But in general, it used to be, and is still, quite an innovative economy, and lost lots of its glance of dynamism, but it's still relatively dynamic. So it's not necessarily a consequence of it, but it's one of the contributing factors. So that is a very crucial question, in my opinion. What is the optimal level of entrepreneurial recycling in the economy? Taking the example of Japan. In Japan, it's very rarely that you start an enterprise. But once an enterprise is started, it's very rarely that it closes down. It's good. You have a very low entrepreneurial recycling in Japan. You have, in an entrepreneurial society like the United States, which is interestingly not always at the top at all those entrepreneurial recycling points, you have a much higher entrepreneurial recycling. You start a business, you get bankrupt, you start a business, you get bankrupt, you start a business, you get bankrupt. And there's no problem with it. And there is no exclusion, social exclusion if you got bankrupt. In Japan, once you got bankrupt, you are out. You're a disgrace for the society. In Germany, a little bit, okay, everybody can make a mistake, but don't make it twice. And the States, you're being congratulated. You have gained an experience, get on. So, oops, sorry. you have gained experience and you can get going. So in other words, the question is, I've never seen any study about that. What is the optimal level of entrepreneurial recycling? Maybe if you go for the Schmitt-Degenhardt view of innovative destruction, you would prefer high entrepreneurial recycling. Probably. But that depends also on our viewpoints. And it depends what you look, how you look at it from human development perspective, from the choices of the people. I think that is a very crucial question. Thank you. And there's only one more question left, so you can stay there. Sorry, because it's coming directly afterwards. Thank you. At least nobody can blame me later on that you cannot read what's written there. That was the whole trick with it. So competition has arguably the strongest impact on human development, as it determines employment, growth, poverty, social inclusion, exclusion, and environmental degradation. That sentence comes from Elena. You might recall. So it has a very strong impact. And that is the last question. Does competition lead to human development? Superior, I know you don't like the word superior, as much as I recall. Human development, superior outcomes. Does it lead to a higher level of human development? These are the 6 questions which we can discuss. And I'm at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Now, any questions which you have? Any points? Any views? We can start wherever you want.
Can I ask just a question to clarify? You said that in CIS countries, about 30% of this of people are necessity entrepreneurs. And I'm just wondering what kind of entrepreneurship activity is that mostly? Probably, it's my guess that it's trade and agriculture, and not some research and development probably. So it's
no, certainly not. It is usually very capital extensive businesses, exactly like trade, retail. It's very capital extensive. You can get quickly out. You don't have high risk. And you don't have high cost if you leave it. So it's mainly those kind of retail services or other kind of very simple services which don't require specific skills and high money. Because beyond friends, foods, and family, they also don't get money. Okay, you had a question.
You mentioned the concept of CSR and that some companies are using it, recognizing CSR gives some competitive edge. So my question to you would be, what do you think about the Central Asian context and companies and possibility of CSR there? Even if CSR is used, do you think it's genuinely taken as a way of competitive development, or like just window dressing?
Good question. The point is, you must distinguish when you look at private sector. You must distinguish. I'm sorry, I'm running a lot up and down. So you must distinguish. You must think about it that the private sector is not a homogeneous whole. The big multinationals usually have a big base in Western countries where civil society is very active. And civil society takes an interest in what the company is doing. So they need to care for their overall actions and supply chains. And they better do so, and they realize they have a long-term planning, either way, because they're working mostly in stable environments. They can afford to look 10 or 20 years ahead because they know my company will still exist in 20 years. And CSR is nothing else but looking beyond the edge of tomorrow. Now, then we have the large national companies, which are just within their national boundaries active. mostly. I mean, that are usually, in particular in these countries, oligarchs who are very closely related to the government. They don't need to care for CSR. They do it more as a point of political favors. They respect, an influential political person like us, and why don't you build us a school? Okay. Give me that for later on that vote, or that concession or whatever. So it's a complete different story. Therefore, CSR activities, now CSR is a term which you can stretch extremely much. CSR activities among national companies, national-oriented companies and nationally oriented companies, in most national-oriented companies in most CIS countries, so one has to be careful, are not that one what we would what would give them the competitive edge as we define it here. It gives them the competitive edge because it buys them political favors. So it's in that sense not a corporate social responsibility, it's a corporate political profitability, I don't know. So, and then lastly, mind you, small enterprises are, there are very, very preciously few studies on really how much do small companies spend on CSR. I found some from you need a study which compared 7 clusters in different countries, and one from India and one from Germany. And interestingly, as they define CSR, they usually invest up to 1% of their turnover into CSR in kind and in cash. Even they do something in CSR. But they do it from a complete different perspective, because it's a small company, it's community-based, it's locally oriented. And they do it because they are in a community. So they buy with that one also some certain kind of goodwill, but that is really social responsibility. Did it answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I studied myself management and business administration, and I remember very well from the first year of my university we had a course on Introduction to Business Studies. And we also had in wide consideration of Schmitt-Degenhardt, innovation and entrepreneurship. But at the end of the 4 years, what I realized of my studies, that actually our education in the region is based on theoretical knowledge, but not on practice. And you know the theories, you know benefits, you know disadvantages. But when you come to implementation, you have to be also lawyer, you have to be accountant, and then people get lost. And I think this is why the entrepreneurship activity and then becomes like, you become isolated in society because the education and perspective, what we build for young people. I mean, if you don't, and then somebody starts something, then they get trapped in some legal issues that actually not that from the bad will, but they simply not aware. So I think it's totally necessary practice what, for example, in America they give.
Yeah. Fully agree that there is, in most countries, not only in these countries, a complete difference between theory and practice. We know it usually when you finish university, you say, now, thank you. Now let's start anew. Sorry, very sorry. But to a large degree, it's true that way. Now, go a little bit further. Now, of course, in the legal environment, all that is crippling, and the corruption is crippling, and that reduces the planning horizon. Therefore, the entrepreneurs are not growing, because when you have a planning horizon of a half year or 1 year, why should you invest? Why should you go into CSR? No, I have a planning horizon of a half year or 1 year. I cannot afford having a planning horizon of 10 years when CSR is becoming important. But there's coming one additional point, which is very important, which I hope to have made a little bit clearer at least here. What was it? I read it recently. They said it so nicely, an American professor. He said it so nicely that most of the experiments are weird. Western? I forgot it. So they are weird. Yeah, weird in the sense of the word, but also weird used as abbreviations, because all our analysis, our how do people behave, is based on experiments with students and in American, US American universities. So what is the cultural view of a student in the United States? How does it compare to the student in Kyrgyzstan, in Tajikistan, in wherever? How does it compare? Look at the cultural differences. All the things which we are being flooded with, it's all originating in the United States. It is well and good and great for the United States. But does it really fit to these cultures here? My wife is Filipina. I always realized that how lost the society is after being Asian by origin, with loads of influences in that time already. Then they had 500 years convent by the Spaniards, and 50 years Hollywood by the Americans colonized. There are three complete different mindsets, which one culture, which one brain has to accommodate. It doesn't properly work. Very simple. So you have to be very careful whenever you read now something which has potential cultural influence, be it based on cultural points, and there's much more which is based on that one than what we would directly assume. You have realized it now with many points which I made, that when you read a textbook from authors, that you realize what potential background does this person have, what mindset does he or she reflect, and you realize you have to take it with care. Maybe. Yes.
I keep looking at this question and I'm trying to answer, and I'm not sure if it's going to be clear.
Which question?
The one that's on the slide.
Ah, okay.
And I can think of this public, this like public. What's the word? No. When three companies.
Public-private partnership. Public-private partnership.
Public-private partnership.
No, this kind of licitations.
What?
When you.
Litigation.
Concessions.
When there are three companies putting forward. Yes. Thank you. So in that sense, by having this mechanism, it could, or theoretically, it should lead to superior outcomes, and which means to me that competition can do that. But there are other factors to take into account, and that's corruption and nepotism and all sorts of favoring one or the other because of different reasons, not the efficiency or the validity of the project. So then, in that sense, even though we have competition and the mechanism in place, it would not necessarily lead to superior outcomes. Am I right in thinking about this? Is this a good example, or?
Yes, you're right, and that's probably a good example because it makes it more concrete and easier. But it shows directly the limits. I've experienced those things myself, where we had to tender, for example, the former life before UNDP, and I had a past. A good past. Okay. For example, we tendered the reconstruction of a building. Coincidentally, three of us. Coincidentally, the three of us were maybe in 100,000, in a $1 million project. They were all by maybe $5,000 difference. So clear. And coincidentally, $5,000 the lowest was the one who had a construction company who was then also afterwards a beneficiary of that building, and so far speaking about corruption and all those points. In other words, there is in Russia It is, of course, official, but it is unimportant evidence, as I would say. The companies, when there is a tender, they distribute it because everybody knows you have to have 3 applications. And making a tender documentation is a lot of work. So it's always okay. The 3 of us know 1, 2, 3. We make this time tender. This time you win, next time you win, next time I win. And then it goes on. It is a clear agreement between the companies. And it simply shows, look at the LIBOR, what I just mentioned, which is another point. It's not a tender, but nevertheless, all our laws and rules and regulations always require in the end at least a tiny bit of decency. And I'm not so sure where we are with that part. So that is one point. And the other point, which I would like to put there with the HD superiority tender processes. You might have heard about that, what we call the winner's curse. The winner's curse is nothing else but when you go into a tender and you really want to win the tender, you bid so low that you win the tender but you're cursed because you cannot manage it. So everything has its limitations. That's always a problem with it. And it happens a number of times, and then of course if you are in a lucky position and you have a tender one with the government or with certain government units, everything is okay, good, we cancel the tender, everything is fine, everything is easy, or we bail you out, or we do this, or we do that, socialization of losses, etc. Okay, good. You can always say, yes, there is something which sometimes you have bad luck. With the best intention, you just make it wrong. Yes, a number of times you know exactly that you will not manage it. That you simply rely on renegotiation. I know all those cases. So that gives all the limitations to this competition point. Yeah? Questions? Yes?
The impression I'm getting from the presentation so far tries to show that the private sector is synonymous with entrepreneurship.
Is what? Synonymous. No. Yeah, okay, yes.
Is that the point? Because I'm just wondering whether we can take it like that. Coming from, based on the experience that I have, the private sector is different from the concept of entrepreneurship. But from your presentation, I'm just getting
It's a very good question. It's an excellent question. I put the question back. How would you define then private sector?
The private sector, where as we have learned from here, is even one of the pillars of sustainable development, because it's generally termed as an engine of growth, where you have individuals who have their own capital, going into investment, creating jobs, and then it's more or less the informal sector as we started, okay? But then if you look at entrepreneurship, it doesn't necessarily depend on whether you are in the private or public sector. Entrepreneurship is generally some kind of skills development where you need to apply it in any form of production, be it formal or informal. You need them to. Even some people go to the extent of saying that the way we even eat, it requires some form of entrepreneurial skills. So I see entrepreneurship to be like a form of skill or knowledge or something like that. That embodies everything that we do, especially in production. But the private sector, for me, is mostly dominated by individuals who are expected, okay, if you like, to have these entrepreneurial skills to be able to produce. So I'm just trying to maybe call your attention to the fact that Entrepreneurship is much more broader than the private sector. Of course, even if you are in the public sector, you still need to have entrepreneurial skills.
That would go, okay. So in other words, for you, entrepreneurship is more than private sector. Private sector is a part of entrepreneurship, which, taking this viewpoint of yours, I would sign up to. Yes, you need certain kind of entrepreneurial things, even if you want to go on expedition. That is a kind of independent way of thinking. That would take a very broad view of entrepreneurship, right? So now the question is, of course, that is more or less a typological view of entrepreneurship, which is true. In that moment, I would assume that all of us need to be entrepreneurial, just to different degrees and with different focus. Now, the entrepreneur in these definitions is somebody who takes input, for example, capital, and transforms it into something and sells it on. After all, that is the essence of it. When you are making an expedition for yourself, you're doing it for yourself or for your family. I think that has a different quality. So I agree with that definition of entrepreneurship from the more psychological sense, though in our context now, it would probably go too far. Probably goes a little bit too far. But it makes us aware how difficult it is to define what is private sector and what is entrepreneurship. And your question goes further. Your question or your intervention, it's not a question, points to the ownership. The question which we didn't write there, the only question, on is an entrepreneur the one from the ownership? Is it not the entrepreneur? Where are we? Oh no, we have it here. That one. What is an entrepreneur? Is it where it says 3 points only, you would put a 4th point. Where it says the 3 points of being somebody is a Schmitt-Degenhardt entrepreneur who tries to create and grow. The socio-economic view, which includes any necessity entrepreneur. Where it's the intrapreneur, the one who's working in a company, and your comment goes most into that 3rd direction, but also into the private life even. You would have almost the 4th point of saying entrepreneurs, anybody can also be in the private life. Yes, I agree with that one. But we have to, I think in our context of private sector, we have to keep it a little bit limited, and it would not be.
Okay, so the other issue is introduce a competition into the whole idea of entrepreneurship. Particularly in an environment where you have limited resources. The question of human development superior outcomes becomes a little bit of a problem. Because my experience, I always try to draw on what I know, is that when you have limited resources around and then entrepreneurs are trying to compete for that limited, it brings about inefficiency. It brings about inefficiency in the sense that people try to produce anything for the consumer. Okay, so the quality or the superiority that we may be expecting can be, reduced or negatively affected. I'll give you one example. There is this kind of creative business where you have bottled water in Ghana, the sale of bottled water, where you put the water in the bottle. When few people started it, the public realized that it was so much profit, making an investment. So a lot of people jumped into it. So many attracted so many entrepreneurs. So what are we seeing now? Even the main major supplier or producer, you can buy the bottle and when you inspect, you see some deaths or articles in the popular, which becomes very relevant. So when there is competition, we may be thinking that it will enhance the human, or bring some good results. But in some cases, I just want to add that it can bring inefficiency.
Yes. You would, on this one, you have numerous ones. The one which you are mentioning is a typical copycat or Me Too business. Oh, this person is in that business and makes money, so it must be good, I go as well. And so, that is typical. Now, it again shows, you cannot, from your conclusion, you cannot conclude the opposite, that monopoly is better, because we know monopoly creates at least as many inefficiencies. Number two, all resources are limited. Everything is limited. Doesn't matter, name it, it's limited. So, it's a point, again, and now we are at the point of competition policy, of pricing, of regulation, because who owns the resources? Who has the right to the resource air, to the resource water, to the resource name it? Who has the pollution rights? It's always a philosophical question which one has to answer. And then you come to the next point. You mentioned these points of the water quality there. Then you need the regulation. Now, who defends the consumers? Am I, as a consumer, entitled to say that it's water, it's written there that it is good, so I trust this guy, so it must be good? Or am I, as a consumer, supposed to be a sabolo toro, I know everything, because I can look at the water and directly realize, because I have my own laboratory for water quality, oh, this water I cannot drink and this water I can drink. Who has to take the responsibility for the quality? We have regulations there. It's not a point in that sense of competition itself. It's a point of ruthless exploitation of situations. I would like to say it like that. Because you would never dish out your family this kind of water what these people are trying to sell. That is, for me, it's again the point of dignity. So, that's it. You had there.
Yeah, I would like that you mentioned the Japanese example that the entrepreneur will set his career. To what extent can he, because of the education, I would say, have to be a successful entrepreneur?
I cannot answer that one. I would assume that the educational system and the culture are, of course, mutually influencing. You get an educational system which reflects your culture, and the culture reflects your educational system. It's influenced by your educational system. So, my point there would be to assume it has a strong influence, but again, the educational system is influenced by the culture. You would have a different, in the States you have a black box educational system. You make a decision fast, you don't need to know why. It's a black box. In, out. Very good for entrepreneurship 95% of the time. Take that one as an example. It's a, you get that what your culture asks you for in a certain way.
So also maybe market is a job in chances.
Pardon?
Market.
What is a market? Who is a market?
Okay, I think that if education system would be good, but if there is no chance, the monopoly system is high, we cannot say that it's effective. This will not work.
Why?
Even if the education system is
Why?
good.
Sorry for going therein. If now coming to that one, what your colleague said. Okay, we know that the monopoly is not good, but if you have a benevolent company, monopoly might be the optimum way of doing things. Please, in a certain way, camera, don't put me on that. Because everybody would usually say it's impossible, and I would, with reality, I would say yes, it is impossible, because I simply don't believe in the benevolence of the people. So, secondly, you're saying the market. Who is the market? I come again to the euro crisis, and to that what I just said before, when they always say the markets don't trust Italy, Greece, Spain, blah, 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 blah. Who are the markets? When you just look at the relation between the major creditors and these people, countries who take up loans, and when you just look at the typical herd effect, somebody makes a decision who is more powerful, and then you influence things. Look at it that you can trick the Libor. I wouldn't have believed that before, but true, you can, of course. So who is the market? It's always when you look when you listen to the news, it's always so nicely said, yes, the market. Sometimes you must ask yourself, who is the market? Being an economist, I of course believe in the power of the market. But again, the markets need to have the right playground that they work.
You say that monopolies are not efficient, but all the countries probably have major monopolies, like Metro, which we have here.
Metro.
It's the only way to run this business because it's so efficient. Like, you know, like post office, different gas companies, water companies, they work privately owned or publicly owned. This is the only way of efficiently running this business.
Okay, good. They are so-called the typical argument of the natural monopolies, which is to a certain degree also right. For example, trains, etc. Anything which is track-bound, like pipelines and metro, all those things, are usually monopolized. But then ask yourself, if a monopoly would be a good option, naturally, then why do you think particularly those monopolies need high, very strong supervision from the government? And high regulation? Because otherwise they would rise the prices, they would say, I don't care. And so, in other words, a monopoly, yes, there are certain sectors where you would say there is a case for a natural monopoly. But please, still supervise it. And please don't be the supervision what we experienced in the last few years in the banking sectors, which says one is not enough, I close both eyes and rather than go it down. Then we are gaining another point of this supervision and how do companies in collusion with some regulators overlook certain details and then bring millions of people, I would say billions of people into misery. Okay, there was a question here on this side again.
Yeah, we can take two questions maximum.
I would like to know if you think that maybe we can somehow rephrase this question and try to understand instead which kind of business can actually lead to HD superior outcomes. I mean, how a business should be run in order to lead to HD superior outcomes. I'm thinking about social entrepreneurship, which is clearly a way to meet in a business way or in a market way a human need, a very basic human need. I would like to know what's your opinion on this.
It's a good question. It's a different question. It's very different, so it's not a reformulation of the question, it's a different question. Now imagine a world with only with social entrepreneurs. First of all, I would doubt that you would find enough people who want to be a social entrepreneur. Number two, what would be the outcome? Maybe we can put it as a seventh question. Imagine a world with social, only with social enterprises. Does it work? I would like to ask you, because we're like to close, since we didn't discuss really these questions, I would like to ask you to take these questions up and think about it yourselves, and discuss it yourselves, because all these questions are, after all, our daily bread. When you look at human development and private sector, they are our daily bread. And they make you reflecting what you hear constantly, the stereotypes which you hear constantly. So, therefore, I would ask you to write them down and think about it. Unfortunately, I will not be here to discuss with you the outcomes of it, but maybe you can write them.
We will put the questions online on the forum and encourage students to respond and pass to you so that you have answers.
That's it? No, we're still 1 minute. Don't cut us for going off.
Okay,
last question.
The first question is something that I've never thought about before, because I know the scholarly literature is full of research on the trade unions and the rights of those who employ, and this is a really good question to ask. So the only two things came up to my mind, that probably that the governments who should, and to some extent, do represent the interests of the unemployed, and these are social movements. Does it make sense, or what do you think?
Does the government really represent the interests of young people?
To some extent. Well, you can register yourself as an unemployed, and it seems.
Do you have a lobby of the unemployment officers that they have?
What about social movements? That
social movement is every unemployed somewhere represented in the social.
But at least it's better than nothing.
Yes, it's better than nothing. Yes. So you see that our substitute mechanisms. One more question, which Balazs just told me yesterday, which I loved. There is one CIS country has a Ministry of Unborn Generations.
Sorry?
Has a Ministry for Unborn Generations. I don't know. One CIS country has a Ministry for Unborn Generations. Who represents it? So
there is no one?
No, there is nobody in that sense who represents them. There is, we find alternative mechanisms, we got around it. But somehow the trade unions are, after all, if you want to see it like that, the strongest opponents of the unemployed. Because they want to protect those ones who have a job. Yeah? So that's a genuine interest of a trade union. It's a genuine interest of a trade union. So there are few, of course, who go a little bit beyond that. And who really go beyond that, who try to then protect them, that those who have a job, that it's getting easier, that they can stay in the job, etc., etc. Sure. Right for that direction, it's not black and white, that is clear, but when you look at the basic philosophy of it, you see that there is a big difference. So you're right, that they try to get the short-term unemployed, that they try to help them as well, to keep them in resources.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephan. As it often happens, there are much more questions which we still need to think about, and that means this is the beauty of those sessions. As a person representing the interest of those who are hungry, I invite you for a lunch break and see you 2 o'clock.
You are not quite sure.
So normally I think what they do is it's okay then 2% of this network because they have one regional and they're struggling.
The higher exactly. Then they are
Thanks for your sending us the photo.
exactly.
So the link everybody
Thanks.
Everybody is thank you very much. Civil society. And everybody is